The narrative of the 20th century is often defined by its staggering capacity for industrialized violence, heavily focused on the battlefields of Europe and the horrifying atrocities of the Second World War. However, the dark blueprint for the century's genocidal mechanics was drawn decades earlier, not in the snows of Eastern Europe, but in the arid, sun-baked expanses of southwestern Africa. Here, in what is today the modern nation of Namibia, the German Empire orchestrated the first genocide of the 20th century between 1904 and 1908. The Herero and Nama peoples, distinct indigenous societies with complex political and economic structures, were subjected to a campaign of absolute annihilation that predated the term genocide itself. This was not a tragic byproduct of chaotic warfare, nor was it an accidental escalation of a colonial skirmish. It was a methodical, state-sanctioned policy of racial extermination, executed through military encirclement, weaponized geography, and the institutionalized brutality of concentration camps. To understand this forgotten genocide requires us to look past the heavily sanitized versions of colonial history. It demands an examination of how an empire, driven by an insatiable hunger for land and resources, rationalized the complete erasure of entire populations.
The destruction of the Herero and Nama was fueled by an intersection of economic greed, pseudoscientific racism, and the ruthless calculus of imperial expansion. Their tragedy stands as a haunting prelude to the Holocaust, establishing a terrifying precedent for how a modern state could mobilize its military and bureaucratic apparatus to erase a people from the face of the earth. Today, the windswept dunes of the Namib Desert and the vast stretches of the Kalahari conceal the silent graves of tens of thousands of victims. Their stories have been marginalized in global history, overshadowed by the global conflicts that followed. Yet, the legacy of their systematic slaughter remains embedded in the socio-economic fabric of contemporary Namibia, where the descendants of the survivors continue to grapple with generational trauma, dispossession, and a deeply contested struggle for historical recognition and restorative justice. The tragedy of the Herero and Nama is inextricably linked to the geopolitical anxieties of late 19th century Europe, specifically the phenomenon known as the Scramble for Africa. The Berlin Conference of 1884, orchestrated by the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, formalized the rapid partitioning of the African continent among European powers. Germany, a newly unified empire, arrived late to the colonial enterprise, driven by a profound nationalistic anxiety that it was missing out on its rightful place in the sun.
The acquisition of overseas territories was viewed not merely as an economic necessity, but as a crucial metric of imperial prestige and a solution to domestic overpopulation. Consequently, the territory that would become German Southwest Africa was claimed, a vast, seemingly barren landmass, roughly 1.5 times the size of the German Empire itself. Initially, the German presence was minimal, relying on a patchwork of treaties negotiated under false pretenses with various indigenous leaders, including those of the Herero and Nama. These treaties ostensibly offered protection, but in reality, they were legalistic mechanisms designed to secure land rights, mining concessions, and political subjugation. The overarching objective of the German colonial administration was the establishment of a settler colony, a Siedlungskolony, which inherently demanded the displacement of the native population to make way for German farmers and ranchers. The ideology of Lebensraum, or living space, a concept that would later become central to Nazi expansionism, found its earliest practical application in the dusty plains of Southwest Africa. As German settlers began to arrive in increasing numbers, drawn by the promise of cheap land and supported by the colonial state, the existential threat to the indigenous way of life became undeniable. The colonial administration functioned on a strictly racial hierarchy, where European economic interests superseded any semblance of indigenous sovereignty or basic human rights.
The systematic dispossession of the Herero people accelerated drastically in 1897 with the outbreak of the Rinderpest epizootic, a highly contagious and lethal viral disease that decimated cattle populations across southern Africa. For the Herero, whose entire socio-economic universe revolved around cattle, the Rinderpest was an apocalyptic event. It is estimated that up to 90% of their herds perished in the outbreak.
The ecological disaster was immediately weaponized by the German colonial administration and opportunistic European traders. Stripped of their primary source of wealth and sustenance, the Herero were forced into a position of extreme economic vulnerability. German traders aggressively offered goods on credit at exorbitant, highly predatory interest rates. When the Herero inevitably defaulted on these engineered debts, the colonial legal system, which inherently disenfranchised the indigenous population, permitted the traders to confiscate Herero land and any remaining cattle as payment. This insidious process of legal expropriation was compounded by the relentless expansion of German infrastructure, most notably the construction of the railway line inland from the coastal town of Swakopmund. The railway sliced through traditional grazing lands, physically dividing Herero territory and facilitating the rapid influx of more white settlers.
By January 1904, the pressure had reached a critical mass. Paramount Chief Samuel Maharero, recognizing that diplomatic appeals to the German administration were futile, made the momentous decision to launch an armed uprising. The Herero Rebellion was not a spontaneous riot. It was a carefully coordinated and desperate war of liberation. In a series of swift, highly organized attacks, Herero forces targeted German farms, trading posts, and vital infrastructure like railway lines and telegraph wires across the Central Territory. Maharero issued explicit orders to his commanders to strictly target German adult males and military personnel, expressly forbidding violence against women, children, missionaries, and non-German Europeans, such as the British and Boers. This deliberate restraint underscored the political nature of the uprising. It was an anti-colonial war aimed at reclaiming stolen land, not a campaign of indiscriminate slaughter. The initial phase of the uprising was incredibly successful. The news of the uprising, and specifically the early defeats of the seemingly invincible German Imperial Army at the hands of African pastoralists, sent shockwaves all the way to Berlin. The German public and the highest echelons of the military establishment were deeply humiliated. Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II was infuriated by the inability of the local colonial forces to swiftly crush the rebellion. The appointment of Lieutenant General Lothar von Trotha in May 1904 marked the definitive turning point in the conflict, transforming a colonial war of suppression into a systematic campaign of genocide. Von Trotha was a hardened, ruthless veteran of the German Imperial Army, having previously commanded forces during the brutal suppression of the Wahehe Rebellion in German East Africa and the Boxer Rebellion in China. He arrived in Southwest Africa with a massive expeditionary force, heavily armed with modern artillery and machine guns, and backed by a terrifying ideological mandate. Von Trotha fundamentally disagreed with Governor Leutwein's approach of negotiating a surrender and integrating the Herero into the colonial economy as a subjugated labor force. For von Trotha, this was not a political conflict, but a racial war of extermination. He openly articulated his belief in social Darwinism, the pseudo-scientific justification that the weaker African races were destined to be annihilated by the superior European races in the struggle for living space. He declared that African nations only responded to the absolute application of force and terror. Upon taking command, von Trotha systematically ignored any peace feelers or attempts at negotiation extended by the Herero leaders. He methodically built up his troop strength, improved logistical supply lines, and prepared for a decisive, annihilating strike. Von Trotha's strategy culminated in August 1904 at the Battle of Waterberg, an isolated plateau that rises dramatically from the surrounding plains. Pursued by the heavily armed German forces, the majority of the Herero nation, encompassing tens of thousands of men, women, children, and the remaining cattle herds, had gathered at the Waterberg, drawn by its vital water springs. Von Trotha saw this mass concentration as the perfect opportunity to execute his war of annihilation. He deployed his forces in a massive encircling maneuver, utilizing modern field artillery and Maxim machine guns to bombard the dense Herero encampments from multiple directions. The Herero fighters, despite being outgunned, mounted a fierce and courageous defense, inflicting significant casualties on the advancing German lines. However, the sheer volume of German artillery fire caused devastating losses among the Herero civilians and their livestock. As the battle raged, the German encirclement tightened, yet von Trotha deliberately left one specific route relatively unguarded, the path leading eastward,
away from the fertile plains and directly into the unforgiving expanse of the Omahake Desert, the westernmost extension of the Kalahari. Believing they were exploiting a gap in the German lines to escape the slaughter, the Herero broke out to the east.
Once the Herero were driven into the Omahake Desert, General von Trotha ordered his troops to form a 250-mile cordon along the desert's edge, explicitly sealing the Herero inside the waterless wasteland. To formalize his intent, on October 2, 1904, von Trotha issued the infamous Vernichtungsbefehl, or extermination order. The proclamation chillingly stated that the Herero people must leave the land, and if they did not, they would be forced out with the cannon. He explicitly ordered that any Herero found within German borders, with or without a gun, with or without cattle, was to be shot. Furthermore, he explicitly stated he would no longer accept women and children, but would drive them back to their people or shoot them. German patrols systematically poisoned or sealed the few isolated waterholes at the fringes of the desert. What followed was a slow, agonizing death for tens of thousands of people. Men, women, and infants died of severe dehydration and starvation under the relentless African sun. German military diaries from the period casually document the discovery of dry wells surrounded by the desperate, skeletal remains of hundreds of Herero who had dug frantically into the sand with their bare hands in a futile search for moisture. As the horrific fate of the Herero became apparent, the Nama people in the southern half of the territory realized that they were the inevitable next target of German extermination policies. In October 1904, Captain Hendrik Witbooi, a highly influential Nama leader who had previously maintained a pragmatic and often strained alliance with the German administration, officially declared war. Unlike the Herero, who had engaged in large-scale pitched battles, the Nama immediately resorted to asymmetric guerrilla warfare, heavily leveraging their unparalleled mastery of the harsh, rugged terrain of the south. The Nama commandos were incredibly mobile, utilizing their superior horsemanship to launch lightning-fast raids against German supply columns, isolated garrisons, and railway lines before vanishing into the rocky canyons and scrubland. This form of warfare deeply frustrated the rigid German military apparatus. Von Trotha's forces, accustomed to conventional set-piece battles, were entirely unsuited for the grueling counterinsurgency campaign required to pacify the South. The Nama resistance was highly effective, dragging the conflict on for years and inflicting significant financial and psychological costs on the German Empire. However, the relentless attrition of the war eventually began to take its toll.
With the conventional military campaigns drawing to a close, the German colonial administration initiated the final and perhaps most chilling phase of the genocide, the systematic internment of surviving Herero and Nama civilians in concentration camps. The most notorious of these facilities was established on Shark Island, a barren, windswept peninsula off the coastal town of Luderitz. Shark Island was not a prisoner of war camp, it was a death camp, designed for the systematic elimination of its inmates through deliberate neglect and lethal forced labor. Thousands of Herero and Nama men, women, and children were transported in open cattle cars and herded onto the freezing, exposed rocks of the island. They were given virtually no shelter against the biting Atlantic winds and were sustained on starvation rations of uncooked rice and flour. The inmates were subjected to brutal forced labor, tasked with physically expanding the port of Luderitz and building the coastal railway under the whips of German overseers. The horrors of Shark Island also served as a macabre laboratory for emerging European pseudosciences. Dr. Eugene Fischer, a prominent German geneticist, utilized the camps to conduct horrific medical experiments and pseudoscientific anthropometric measurements on the inmates, seeking to prove theories of racial inferiority.
By 1908, the German military officially declared the wars against the Herero and Nama concluded. However, the cessation of active combat did not signify a return to peace, but rather the institutionalization of a draconian, apartheid-style system designed to forever subjugate the traumatized survivors. The demographic reality was staggering. An estimated 80% of the Herero and 50% of the Nama populations had been annihilated.
The colonial administration immediately enacted a series of punitive ordinances that stripped the survivors of their fundamental human rights and their remaining economic autonomy. All Herero and Nama land, along with their remaining livestock, was officially expropriated by the German state and distributed among white settlers. The indigenous populations were legally prohibited from owning land or cattle, effectively destroying the pastoralist foundation of their cultures and economies. To enforce complete control, all Herero and Nama over the age of 7 were required to wear metal identification tags around their necks at all times, a dehumanizing precursor to the past systems of later segregationist regimes. They were legally compelled to provide manual labor for the white settler economy, distributed across the territory to work on German farms, in households, or in the rapidly expanding diamond mines.
The legacy of the Herero and Nama genocide casts a long, indelible shadow over modern-day Namibia. Today, the demographic and economic scars of the genocide remain glaringly visible. The descendants of the Herero and Nama genocide continue to live with the generational trauma of near annihilation and remain disproportionately affected by landlessness and poverty. For decades, the German government flatly refused to officially recognize the atrocities as genocide or offer formal apologies. However, following years of relentless advocacy and diplomatic pressure by Herero and Nama activists, a significant milestone was reached in May 2021. The German government officially acknowledged the events of 1904 to 1908 as a genocide. Alongside the formal apology, Germany pledged $1.1 billion in development aid. Yet this agreement remains deeply controversial. Many Herero and Nama descendant organizations forcefully reject the settlement, arguing that development aid cannot substitute for direct, legally binding reparations. The story of the Herero and Nama genocide is a profound reminder of the dangers of historical amnesia. It compels us to confront the darkest chapters of colonial history, recognizing that the architectures of extermination that defined the 20th century were forged in the deserts of Africa, and that the struggle for true restorative justice remains an ongoing, vital endeavor.